Hello students, last week we had started with The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh, who was a versatile writer and eminent personality. The Portrait of a Lady is a tribute by the writer to his grandmother, because the lady whose portrait or whose character he has described in the story is his grandmother only. The story has been divided by the writer into three parts, majorly three parts, where he has described three phases of his bonding with his grandmother. We have finished with the first phase, where the writer has introduced to his grandmother and also described how he had spent his childhood with his grandmother when he was in village. His parents had migrated to the city. He was left with his grandmother. How grandmother had taken care of each and every need of him, how she had brought him up, how she would wake him up in the morning. She would dress him up for the school. She would take him to the school. She would accompany him. She would not come back after dropping him at the school, but sit there in a nearby temple and wait for his class to be over. While coming back, she would feed the stray dogs, as right in the morning only she was carrying the stale chapatis to feed those stray dogs. The minute descriptions by the writer very realistically highlight the grandmother's character. But at the same time, this also reflects how for each and everything, the writer wanted to express his gratitude to his grandmother. There was such a bonding between him and his grandmother that there was no need of any words. And both of them, they could understand each other. Just as, for example, he said that while dressing him up, she would just chant her prayers. And he knew that her purpose was to enable him to learn those prayers. However, he was not interested in learning, but he was very keen to hear her sweet voice. So that suggests her love for his love for his grandmother, as well as an understanding what she wants and what he does. Now there is a turning point in his life. After some time, as we said, that the parents had shifted to the city. Now what happened? Let us read from here. This is page number, I think, 4. Yes, this is page number 4. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. Now the parents had settled in the city. After settled well, they had sent for us, meaning they had called the writer and his grandmother also. It means that they were also about to shift to the city now. That was a turning point in our friendship. That was a turning point, meaning there was a change. There was a change in their friendship. Bonding remained the same. Friendship was the same. It was there. But the form of the friendship, there was a drastic change in that. How it changed at the first instance, although we shared the same room, My grandmother no longer came to school with me. This is the first change. In the village, they were sharing the same room. In the village, he was being looked after by his grandmother. In the village, she would accompany him every day to the school. The school was walking distance. But now, grandmother was not accompanying him to the school when he was going. However, both of them, they were sharing the same room. They were living in the same room. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. Why grandmother was not required to accompany him? Because now he was going by a school bus. In the village, it was walking distance. So grandmother and the writer, they used to walk. So grandmother could easily accompany him. But now he was going by the school bus. He was studying in an English school. So grandmother would not accompany him. There were no dogs in the streets. There, the grandmother had been feeding the stray dogs. But in the city, there were no stray dogs. No dogs in the street, meaning no stray dogs could be seen. And she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. But grandmother, as she was very fond of animals and birds, she started feeding sparrows in the courtyard of their city house. Courtyard of the houses, the part of the house which is not covered with roof, which does not have a ceiling, but it is surrounded by the fencing or the wall, boundary wall, etc. Right? This is what, for example, हम इसको हिंदी में आंगन कहते हैं. Right? तो आंगन में बैठ के वो चिड़ियों को, स्पैरोज को दाना डाला करती थी. Now you just see that grandmother, she loved the birds and animals so much. When she did not find the dogs, she did not stay rest. That she had in her mind, that she had that instinct she had, that she had to share. So she started feeding the sparrows. This definitely portrays her beautiful picture that she was so compassionate. She was so much in love with nature. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. As the years rolled by, meaning as the time passed, with the passage of time, now the time span between the two, that also reduced. We saw less of each other. Now it was for very little time when they would be together in the same room. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. In the beginning, she would wake him up. She would get him ready for the school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. What the teacher had taught me. And I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. In the beginning, she would wake him up. She would get him ready for the school. As was her habit, she was completely involved in all the activities of the writer. So when they shifted to city, there also he would come back from the school and she would ask him what the teacher had taught him. And he would tell the grandmother English words she was not familiar with because she had never been to the school. She was uneducated. So he would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. Western science and learning English words, they were completely alien to the grandmother. She was not familiar with that. He would share with her the law of gravity, sciences, Archimedes' principle, a great mathematician, the world being round, geography. He would tell her that all these things he was studying in the school. Geography, science, maths, these were taught to him. This made her unhappy. She was not happy to hear. She was not happy to learn that he was studying all these subjects. Why? What was the reason? She could not help me with my lessons. As I said earlier, that when they were in village, she was completely involved in all his activities. Now she wanted to help him, but she could not help him. Why? Because she had never studied all this, what he had been learning in the English school. So she was quite desperate. She was unable to help him. That's why she was not happy. No, there was another reason also why she was not happy with his learning in this school. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and scriptures. She did not believe in that science, geography, maths that were taught in the school. She was distressed. She was also quite upset. She was sad to hear. She was sad to know that no education of religion was imparted in the school. No holy scriptures were taught. No education in religion was given. When he was in the village, the school was in the premises of that temple only. So there were the priests who were giving the lessons. And here, no religious education. So she was very disturbed to learn this. One day, and I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. Once he came and he was very excited. Usually, the children are fond of music. So he shared with his grandmother that in the school, music lessons were given. He was very excited, but she got quite upset. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentlefolk. She would not consider it respectful. She would not consider it graceful. Learning music was not considered very respectful at that time. For her, music had some lewd meaning, indecent or vulgar. Or in simpler words, not graceful. So she did not like that her grandson was getting music lessons. It was the monopoly of harlots. Harlots are the unfaithful women. The actual meaning is unfaithful women, the women who are not loyal, right? So harlots are actually the women who are dancing at various events. So it was the monopoly of harlots and beggars. Harlots and beggars. It was meant for them, according to the grandmother, not for gentlefolk, not for the civilized, educated people, not for the civilized society. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She did not say anything. Her face reflected, he could read her face that she was not happy with this. She did not say anything, but she was quiet. She was silent. Her silence spoke about her opinion that she did not agree, she did not support his learning music. She rarely talked to me after that. After that, it was very rare, it was very seldom when she would talk to her grandson. Because she must be thinking that there would be something else he would talk about that he's learning, which might upset her. Anyway, she had perhaps understood that the time was changing. So this was the first turning point when they migrated to the city and how she was sharing the same room, but now she was not able to give as good company, as much company to her grandson as she had been giving earlier. When I went up to the university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of friendship was snapped. Another third turning point, when he went to the university. When he went to the university, now he had got his separate room. Of course, because he was studying in higher classes, and he needed his room for study. He needed his study room. Now, grandmother and grandson, they had been physically separated, and the common link of friendship was snapped. Snapped meaning broken. And the common link of friendship, what was the common link? The room. They were sharing the same room. But now they had been living in separate room, so that link of friendship was broken. They had a bonding, right? They had an emotional bonding with each other. However, physically they were not close to each other. So this common link of friendship was broken. It does not mean that their feelings have changed for each other. No. Of course it is that now they would not be able to meet each other every day. Now they will not be able to see each other all the time, right? But their distance, there was a distance between the two now. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. The grandson was given a separate room, grandmother in her own separate room. Anyway, grandmother accepted her seclusion. Seclusion, separation, isolation. She was isolated in her own room. She accepted it with resignation, meaning without any complaint. She never protested. She never made any hue and cry. She never complained that she had been isolated. What does it suggest? It suggests how understanding and practical she was. She knew that with the time, one has to change. She could understand now the needs of her grandson, his priorities, that they have changed. Accordingly, she has tried to accommodate herself. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. Now, grandson is busy with his own life. So, what to do? How to spend the time? She has all the sources to spend her time with. She had started spinning the wheel. What is the spinning wheel, children? Charkha, Gandhi ji ka charkha, right? So that she does not need anyone to talk with, because now the whole time she had been spending on spinning the wheel. So she did not need to talk to anyone. From sunrise to sunset, meaning from morning till evening, from morning till the dusk time, she sat by her wheel spinning. The whole day she had been spinning the wheel and reciting prayers. And while she was spinning the wheel, she would be reciting, she would be chanting her prayers. This is what you must have observed many a times, the old people. If you have your old grandmother around, you must have noticed all the time they are sitting and they are chanting prayers. They are telling the beads of rosary. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. It was only in the afternoon she would take a short break from spinning the wheel and from the chanting of her prayers. And that very time also, she would not sit idle. That very time she would spend in feeding the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Look at this beautiful bonding the grandmother had with nature. As she would sit in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, into crumbs, hundreds of the birds they would gather around her because every day she had been feeding them, so they have got used to it. They were very sure, they knew when grandmother would come and sit. That's why they would wait, and the moment she would sit there, they would come, they would gather around her, creating a veritable bedland, creating a loud noise with their chirpings. Some came and perched on her legs. A beautiful love and bonding between grandmother and these birds. Some came and perched on her legs. Some birds would come and sit on her legs. Perched, sit on her legs. Others on her shoulders. Some would come and sit on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. Some birds would sit on her head. She smiled, but never shooed them away. They would sit on her legs, they would sit on her shoulders, they would sit on her head, but she would keep smiling. She would never be angry. She would never shoo them away. She would never turn them away. वो उनको कभी भी वहां से हटाती नहीं थी. Despite that they had been jumping and sitting on her legs and shoulders. That means that she would love their company. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. This was for half an hour in a day that she would take a short break. And this half an hour's time was the happiest time of her day because that very time she would spend in the beautiful company of the birds, the sparrows by feeding them. She loved the sparrows, but don't you think, children, that the sparrows also loved her? That's why they would come, they would perch on her legs, on her shoulders, and on her head. Now, when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. Now, he had to go for further studies. He had to go to abroad. He had to go to a foreign land for further studies. I was sure my grandmother would be upset. I would be away for 5 years. As he was going for 5 years, he was very sure that grandmother would be upset. She would be sad. She would be disturbed to know that his grandson is going for 5 years. And at her age, one could never tell. And at her age, one could never tell, meaning because she was so old aged, grandmother was so old aged that it was uncertain whether after 5 years when he returns, she would be alive or not. And also, one cannot predict about her how she would react when he is leaving for the foreign land. Maybe that she would cry, she would weep, she would miss him. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age, one could never tell, but my grandmother could. But my grandmother could, meaning his grandmother was very strong. His grandmother was very strong. Later on, he would tell you when he came back after 5 years, she was alive. She was very strong. She did not cry. She did not cry at his departure. She was not even sentimental. She never expressed her sentiments. She never cried. She never shed tears. She never expressed that she was sad. She came to leave me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. She did come to see him off. She did come to see off her grandson at the railway station, but she didn't talk, nor did she express any emotion. She just tried to compose herself. She just tried to remain silent, and she contained all her emotions herself. Her lips moved in prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. It does not mean that she was not concerned about her grandmother. She was. She was. Her lips moved in prayer. What did she do? Instead of crying, instead of expressing her emotions, she had been chanting her prayers. She had been doing prayer all the time. And definitely, of course, she must be praying for the well being of her grandson only. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. She was still telling the beads of her rosary. अभी भी वो माला जप रही थी. Silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. Silently, when he was leaving, she just quietly kissed his forehead, and the poet was touched by the moist, by the wet imprint of his grandmother as she kissed his forehead. He thought perhaps this was the last physical touch he had got from his grandmother. It was perhaps the last physical contact between him and his grandmother, because he was not sure whether the grandmother would be alive when he comes back after 5 years or not. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. After 5 years, when he returned, grandmother was very much there to receive him. She received him at the station. She did not look a day older. He did not find any change in her appearance. She was still the same. She was never looking older or more feeble than before. She still had no time for words. And while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. She still had no time for words. Again, she met him. She had been quiet. She just clasped me in her arms. She hugged him, but she had been reciting her prayers. She did not say anything, she did not utter any word while hugging him. She simply had been reciting her prayers, perhaps expressing her gratitude to the God that her grandson has come back hale and hearty. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. On the first day, when the grandson arrived, when the writer arrived, that day also she did not miss her happiest moments. She did not skip that very time, that half an hour break when she would be feeding sparrows. Her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer. For long she had been feeding them, and with frivolous rebukes. With frivolous rebukes, very lightly at times, she would scold the birds. But the scolding was nothing serious. It was just casual, out of love. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. Now, what happened the same day, in the evening? A change. There was a change, a drastic change. Grandmother, who had always been praying, she did not pray that day. What did she do then? How did she spend her time? She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. She gathered the women of the neighborhood, and she got an old drum. This old drum is what we call here is dholki. and she started singing. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. Sagging, loose skin. When is it the loose skin of a drum? When it is worn out, when it gets very old, right? So she had been thumping that old drum. She had been thumping that old drum. उस ढोलकी को थपथपा रही थी, बजा रही थी. And why she was doing it? Why did she gather all the women? She was celebrating the homecoming of her grandson. Sang of the homecoming of warriors. She was singing the songs which are sung at the homecoming of the warriors when they come back after winning the war. So what is it she was doing? That expresses her excitement. She did not say anything when she received him. But in the evening, she gathered all of the women and she wanted to celebrate the homecoming of her grandson. And that's how she celebrated and expressed her excitement. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. The whole family had to persuade her, had to compel, had to force her, had to convince her that she should stop singing and playing the drum. Because she had been overstraining herself, she would get tired. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. Writer said that in his life he had never found the day the grandmother had missed her prayers. And that was the first time he had found her grandmother that she had missed her prayers. The next morning she was taken ill. The next morning she fell ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. They consulted the doctor, and the doctor said there was no need to worry. It was a mild fever, and she would recover very soon. She would get well very soon. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. But grandmother has completely defied what the doctor said. Her judgment was entirely different. She said no, her end was near, and now she is about to bid goodbye to this world. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray, she was not going to waste any more time talking to us. Since she had not prayed for so long, so she said only a few hours were left before the close of the last chapter of her life. The close of last chapter of her life, meaning only a few hours were left for her death. After a few hours, she would pass away. She would die. She would say goodbye to everyone. She would bid goodbye to everyone. So she never wanted to waste any time talking to the family. She just wanted to spend that time in prayer. We protested, but she ignored our protests. They all protested. They all opposed what she said, but she just did not pay any attention to the family. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. She was just lying peacefully in her bed. She was telling the beads of her rosary, and she was chanting her prayers. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Soon they noticed that her lips stopped moving, and the rosary, the beads which she was telling, they fell from her fingers that were lifeless, that were numb now. Why? Because the grandmother has died. Such a divine soul she was. She was a God-fearing woman who had come to know about her end, who had come to know about her death. The doctor assured them that she would recover very soon. But she, with full assurance, have told them that she is going to die. And she did. A peaceful pallor spread on her face. Pallor, pale face, paleness, yellowishness because of weakness. Her face turned pale but calm, peaceful, as she was, peace and serene and calm. And we knew that she was dead. And it was known, everybody knew that she has passed away. She is no more there in the world now. She has gone far, far away from this world. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. She was lifted off the bed, she was removed from the bed, and as is customary, as is the custom, as is the tradition, she was laid on the ground. Her dead body was laid on the ground, and it was covered with a red shroud, a red coffin, a red shroud, a red cover. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. Now, the family got busy in making arrangements for the last rites of her funeral. They were making arrangements, and she was left alone in the room. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. They got the stretcher on which she was to be carried to the cremation ground to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. It was the sunset time. Now, please read very carefully. The writer has chosen the time according to the life of the grandmother. The sun was setting, meaning the day ends, children. And whose sun has set here? The grandmother's sun has set here. That is, grandmother's life has ended. And had lit her room, but her room was lit with the golden light of the setting sun. We stopped halfway in the courtyard. They were in the courtyard, halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. The sparrows have also come to know about the last journey of the grandmother. How could they not be the part of this journey? As they had been daily fed by grandmother, as there had been a special bonding between them and the grandmother. So as they were about to go to the grandmother's room, they were halfway in the courtyard. What they found? That the place where grandmother's funeral was lying, thousands of sparrows, they came, they scattered on the floor, and they were sitting there close to the grandmother. There was no chirping. They were not chirping. There was no noise. Remember when she was feeding the sparrows, there was a veritable bedlam of their chirpings. Now there was no loud noise. They were silent. What does it mean? These birds and animals, they cannot speak like us, but they also have emotions. They also have feelings. If grandmother was compassionate, they were also compassionate. They also have the same emotions and feeling. By being silent and by being present there, they were also paying a last tribute, a last homage to their loved one, that is grandmother. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. The whole family was very sad to see the birds. Nobody can do anything. And mother, she fetched some bread for them. She brought some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs. Do you think that the birds will eat the crumbs? The way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The writer's mother tried to imitate his grandmother. The way she used to make bread crumbs and she used to throw it to the birds to feed them. The similar way she also did. The author's mother also did the same. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. The sparrows did not even look at the breadcrumbs. That expresses that they were so sad. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly, as grandmother's corpse, dead body. As her dead body was taken away for the last rites, for the cremation, all the birds, they just moved away from there quietly. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. The sweeper had collected those breadcrumbs and he had thrown those breadcrumbs into the dustbin. So here the writer said at one time, perhaps the bonding between him and his grandmother, it had snapped, but no, it was always there. Only the physical distance has widened. That has grown because of the priorities of the writer that have changed. But she was very understanding. So in this way, the writer has portrayed a beautiful character of the grandmother. He had portrayed his grandmother as an epitome of love, compassion, and beauty. She was so beautiful at heart, genuinely and really a beautiful woman who was such a divine soul. They are only divine people who have so much love and concern for the animals and birds also. So this is how the writer has paid a tribute to his grandmother. Now students, you will see the questions. If any problem, you can always post me your queries onto the English forum through EdGurus, right? Thank you very much. Goodbye.